suppose let's start with this kind of broad take from each of you. Liz first, on where devolution is at. What I mean, are you one of these people that Andy highlights that you like the idea of devolution, but something needs to change?
Yes, absolutely I am. But can I just say before we start on the chat that I really enjoyed the event that you put on, and the feedback from it was terrific, whatever party people were coming along to support. But I thought it gave a really good flavour of the 25 years because you'd managed to get people along who'd been there right from the start. Quite a few of us who've been there sort of for three quarters of the time. And I thought some of the debate was really interesting. But yes, I'm very much in the camp that devolution is the right way forward. But I certainly think quite a lot of changes have to take place, and we got to chatting about some of them at your event. But I certainly think that there's a growing perception in Holyrood that it isn't working well enough. And I'm quite interested in the fact that it's politicians from all parties who have been there for quite some time who are coming out with that suggestion, and also those who are making some of the running on what actually has to happen. And obviously Murdo is one of these people who've got a paper out to put suggestions forward, and I think it'll be up to the new presiding officer actually of the next Parliament as to exactly what happens, but we're full of ideas about some of the things that should happen.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Murdo, what's it like, from the inside? Is it easy to understand where the Parliament is and isn't working? Is it easy being in there and saying, right, hang on, this is dysfunctional, that works well, let's learn, let's change these areas and leave these other ones alone?
Yes, I think there are two fundamental weaknesses in the paper that Liz references that I published a little while ago. It focuses on these. The first is the weakness in the Parliament in terms of the ability of the legislature to hold the executive to account. Now, all parliaments are made up of parliamentarians from different parties. Some will be in government, some are not. The job of Parliament is to scrutinise government. And I think Holyrood doesn't perform well as a vehicle to allow the scrutiny of government, and that's what needs to improve. And the second weakness is the quality of lawmaking. And we've seen simply too much bad law being made in Holyrood over a number of years. We've seen laws which have been struck down by the court, such as the named person policy. We saw that with gender recognition reform, blocked by the UK government, but that was a decision backed by a Scottish court. We've seen laws being made that were so bad, having been criticised by the judiciary, they had to be repealed. The Offensive Behaviour at Football Act being the best example of that. And we've seen too much law being made where, at the very last minute, at stage 3, amendments are introduced. There's no time for consultation, no time for proper scrutiny and debate. They're voted on and go straight for royal assent. And the quality of lawmaking is weak, and that's an area where Holyrood needs to be strengthened.
Interesting. And Liz, what's your take on that? How does it?
Yeah,
how does it feel, and what's the atmosphere like? If you're feeling that frustration, you're seeing bad law making happen. That must be remarkably difficult, actually, to work with.
Yeah, I think Murdo's absolutely right on this, and it is very frustrating. And I noticed this particularly. In fact, I would argue quite strongly that in the time that I've been in the Parliament, I think there is an increasing problem about bad law. But as somebody who sits on the Finance Committee, I'm also concerned about the fact that because there is bad law being constructed, the scrutiny of the financial memorandum that has to go with each bill is not being properly scrutinised. And we've ended up in a scenario in Holyrood just now where there are an awful lot of what they call framework bills. Now, what a framework bill is an attempt by the Scottish Government to involve stakeholders in putting together the bill. Now, I've got no problem about that in terms of, I think, practically that can be very useful to get the views of people who are stakeholders who are going to be affected by the bill. But the trouble is, they're actually introducing the framework bill to its legislative purpose. And at the same time, we're being asked to scrutinise it without knowing what the final result of that bill is going to be. And therefore, it's impossible for us on the Finance Committee to be able to scrutinise it effectively. And I pay great credit to Kenny Gibson as SNP convener and to all my colleagues on the Finance Committee. I think it's quite a collegiate committee in the Parliament, which is perhaps a little unusual these days, because we feel very frustrated as a committee that we just don't get the numbers that we need to know about, and that's one of the reasons why we feel that bad law comes before the Parliament.
I think three things, which are all grossly unpopular. I'm very used to this in my years in politics now.
Not just because you were a Conservative,
and not just because of that, but in large part because of that. I think we need a second chamber. I know unicameralism is very popular, particularly for sub-state parliaments. It's actually quite uncommon to have bicameralism in a sub-state parliament. I get all that, but actually I think the experience of 25 years has shown that a second chamber would have been very good. I personally think it should be a second chamber elected from independents and people from industry and different walks of life, but that's a slightly different story. So I think we need a second chamber. I think we need more MSPs. I don't think 129 is enough to populate all these committees. In Westminster, MPs tend to be on one committee and they do a pretty good job of it. In Holyrood, MSPs can be on several committees and they dip into them all without actually having proper oversight of them all. And I also think to get better parliamentarians, we should be paying them more. So more politicians and paying them more. I realise this is niche.
Popular move.
Somebody's going to need to raise some taxes somewhere, aren't they, Andy?
No, we're definitely not raising taxes. No, that's a different story. We're cutting taxes, Calum. I've already explained this. I suppose the question, though, is a view like that. Why does that not see the light of day in these conversations? Is it because it's wrong, or is it because people, to be honest, elected politicians are just not in the headspace where they can call for more of them and call for more money?
But is part of the problem, Andy, when you talk about having a revising chamber, which I've got quite a lot of sympathy for, has that demand come about because the committee system, which was supposed to be very good at its scrutiny, has not been effective? And I would argue very strongly, and this is part of Murdo's paper as well, that the conveners of committees should be elected and not following the proportional representation, where parties decide effectively, according to proportional representation, who is the convener. I don't think that's effective at all, because that puts a party bias into the whole committee system. And I just don't think that's right. And
well, in the real world, we'll probably find out the answer to that question, because we're not going to have a second chamber, and we probably are going to have elected conveners, I think, after 2026. So we'll find out the answer to that. Maybe in another 10 years' time, we'll know whether I am asking for a second chamber because it just is the right thing to do, or because the committee system was too weak. I think we'll find that out.
And there's no post-legislative scrutiny, which also the Parliament was supposed to deliver, but that's never happened properly.
Wow. So I understand the argument for a second chamber, because I understand the problem that we need to try and fix. I don't think we necessarily need a second chamber at this stage. It might become an unanswerable argument, but for now what I'm proposing is something different, which is a new, instead of having a 3-stage process for legislation, a 5-stage process. So at the end of the current 3 stages, we then have a final stage where we have a new post-legislative committee established, which would not consist of MSPs. This would be a way to bring in people, for example, former MSPs, academics, experts, who would look at legislation that's been passed by Parliament and would have the power to remit that back to Parliament and say, actually, we've looked at this in the cold light of day and we think this isn't workable and you've got it wrong. Now, that in effect would operate as a second chamber, but doesn't create the problem with a second chamber, which is that the public wouldn't want to pay for a whole new tier of politicians and a shiny new building and all the apparatus that goes with it. But it addresses the problem, Andy, that you properly and rightly identify. But I also agree with Liz about strengthening the committees, because having stronger committees with elected committee conveners, who incidentally I think should also be paid extra to recognise that role, that would improve the quality of scrutiny of legislation currently going through, which again is a fundamental weakness, because committees have been too partisan and we've had too many committee conveners who haven't seen it as their job to do anything other than protect government ministers and government legislation, and that's not what committees should be about.
Thank you so much for watching. Press subscribe and you'll get all the best videos offering insight on Scottish politics delivered straight to your feed. Press subscribe and stick around. And if you'd like to hear our conversations in full, open up your podcast app and search for Holyrood Sources.